Hello, so today we are going to talk about functions, and as you guys might know, functions are essentially just lines of code that do a specific set of tasks. So they're telling Matlab to do a specific set of tasks, and we've used a lot of built-in functions already to plot things and create numbers and stuff like that. But today we're going to be writing our own functions in two different ways. So the first way is that you can actually create a function, and I have one already written here. So you can create a file separate from your main function that contains, or your main script that contains a function that will perform some sort of output. So the syntax for functions that we typically use is you declare to Matlab that what you're doing is a function, so you'll type function first, and then this isn't always necessary, but the next part that we talk about is arguments that our function will return once it is finished operating. And then you have your function name, which you want to make sure matches whatever the file name is. So my function name is multiply here, so the file name is also multiply.m. So you want to make sure those match, or it'll give you an error in Matlab. And then this last set of information is the arguments that you are passing to your function. So for example, when we do plot in Matlab, we usually give our x and our y coordinates, and then we can specify different properties, like we want our dots to be red stars. So these are all of our arguments, and likewise, when we're creating our own function, we can decide what arguments we want to include. Okay, so your function here that I've created is called multiply, like I mentioned earlier, and then the file name is also multiply.m, and the arguments that it takes are a and b, and then it's going to return an answer value. So functions don't always have to return something, so this example will, and we'll do one other example that doesn't give any return arguments. So this one, all it's going to do is you're going to pass two values, a and b, to it and multiply them together. So it's not really doing anything that our multiplication sign wouldn't do. It's just to illustrate like how to set up a function. So if we go back to our main file here, function vidlec.m, I am using the multiply function in this first line of code after my initialization. So I have new answer equals multiply 5 and 6. So if I run this code, I didn't suppress the oh, it's showing extra stuff right now that I haven't talked about yet. So if I didn't suppress the output, so we can see that new answer is 30. We can also see in the workspace that new answer is 30. So the multiply function is just multiplying 5 and 6 and returning the value 30 by multiplying them together. So not too crazy, that function, but it's useful if you have a bunch of different data sets. Say you're reading from like 10 different Excel files and performing the same operation on each one. You might want to create a for loop where you put each file into a certain function that'll export all of your data essentially, or like clean it up for you. So you don't want to type in all of those operations in your main function because it might look a little messy. So you can have everything passed to a function instead, and it just cleans up your code a little bit. Okay, so the next type of function that I'm going to show you doesn't return any values. So what I did was I created two variables, x and y here, which are just using the linspace function. So x goes from 0 to 10, and then y goes from 0 to 50. They both have 100 values, which is going to be important for the function's operation. So I created a second function called manyplots. It's really actually only plotting one thing, but I called it manyplots. So I'll open that file here. And what manyplots does is it's going to create a new figure, and you can see that I passed the x and y values to it. And you'll also see that there's no return argument here at the beginning. It just says function many plots. So if you don't care about returning particular values, you just want to do some sort of operation, you don't actually have to have a returning argument. So the first thing that I did here, I created a new figure and told it to hold on. I plotted x versus y on that figure, and then on the same figure I plotted y versus x, and I made that line red, and then I created a legend to show what each line represents. So pretty simple. And I'll run this, and you can see if I run the function on its own, it gives you an error saying not enough input arguments, because we never defined in the function what x and y actually are. So we didn't pass anything to this argument. So if you go back to my main function, you can see I have x and y defined, and then I passed it to my function many plots, and we can see what comes up when I click that. There we go, yay! So there's my many plots function. It's plotting x versus y, or y as a function of x, and also x as a function of y here. So pretty straightforward, but also can be pretty useful if you're wanting to show a bunch of different plots from a bunch of different files and you don't want to type it all into your main function. Okay, so there's another way to create functions, and these are called anonymous functions. And those can be directly written into your main script, which is pretty useful if you're not wanting to create a whole bunch of different function files. And it's got a syntax where f is your function name, and then you use the @ symbol to tell Matlab that you're making an anonymous function. Oh, sorry. You guys heard my cat on the last video, so that was my dog whining for some reason. Sorry about that. Okay, so the next bit is your list of arguments, similar to how many plots has x, y. The anonymous functions also can have arguments passed to it, and then you have a final expression. So here what I did was essentially create a function that does exactly the same thing as my multiply function, and I called it mult2. And in the same exact way, I passed some arguments for a and b to each one. And if I run my code, actually I don't have to run it. You can already see that when I run it, the answers are down here. So ans1 is 2500, and then ans2, 1 times 3 is 3. So that's essentially a very basic intro into how you can create different types of functions. And I hope this will be useful for you guys, especially in the next lab where we are going to be creating some anonymous functions that do some different operations.